Hi, in this video, we're going to look at the service called Azure Bastion and see what exactly that provides. So, before looking into Azure Bastion, let's look at the architectural diagram of an Azure virtual machine in context of the Azure Bastion service. So we know that each and every Azure virtual machines that's created, be it Windows or a Linux, it has something called a NIC, which is a network interface card, to which you get a public IP address assigned. So in order for you to log into the VM, like if it is a Windows VM, you RDP using port 3389. If it is a Linux VM, you SSH into the VM using port 22. So in order for you to do that, you need to be having a public IP address assigned, without which you cannot do unless you have a dedicated site-to-site connectivity or point-to-site connectivity to the Azure virtual network. You need to have a public IP in order for you to log in or to remote or to control the VM. But this is not the best and the most secure methods of keeping your public IP of the virtual machine exposed to the internet, right? So in order for you to take care of the security and make the virtual machines more secure by masking the public IP, but still having a way to connect to the virtual machines without the need of a public IP or a site-to-site connectivity, you need to have a method, and that is exactly what your Azure Bastion service provides. It provides a secure and seamless RDP SSH connectivity to your VMs directly in the Azure portal, and it can be used to mask public IPs of the VMs and connect without the need of a public IP, right? So let's look at the architectural diagram of a Bastion service. So Azure Bastion service is implemented on a virtual network level, right? So for example, in this diagram, if you have some set of virtual machines in a virtual network and you don't want to expose the public IPs of those VMs, what I can do is you can actually create a dedicated subnet called Azure Bastion subnet, right? And Azure Bastion subnet is something which will be assigned a public IP, and that will be taking the incoming connections. So if the user has a need to connect to say this particular Azure virtual machine, the user and this virtual machine doesn't have a public IP. So what he'll do is that he can connect using the Bastion service. It will be over port 443 HTTPS to the Bastion service, and the Bastion service would actually pass the connection over the private IP, right? Be it RDP or SSH, private IP from the Bastion service to the respective VM, right? So that's what the Azure Bastion service provides. You can see that it actually helps users to connect over the your web to the Bastion service, and the Bastion service helps to forward the connection over the private IP to the respective virtual machines, thus providing a way of more security to your virtual machines, right? So the things that we need in order to implement the Bastion service would be Azure Virtual Network. We need a dedicated subnet, which has to be exactly named as Azure Bastion subnet. And then we need to create a Azure Bastion host, should be in the same region as a virtual network. So having discussed this, let's see them in action in the portal. So if I just go to my Azure portal, you can see that I have a virtual machine. Okay. So I have a virtual machine and called Azure VM1, that is in resource group 1, East US. So what I've done is I have actually disabled the public IP address of this VM. So what happens, I don't have any site-to-site or point-to-site connectivity to the VM. So if I just normally try to RDP into the VM, let's see what happens. So if I normally try to RDP into the VM, let's see, just comes up. So you can see that it is connecting over the private IP address assigned, which will not work, right? Because I'm trying to connect from a laptop to the VM, which doesn't have any point-to-site or which doesn't have any site-to-site connectivity. Both are in different networks, so it won't be able to connect over the private IP address, right? So and had my virtual machine had the public IP address assigned, I could have very well logged in, connected, RDP'd, but that would have exposed the public IP of my virtual machine to the internet, which I don't want. So I have disabled it. But now what do? I need a way to connect to this virtual machine. And that's where Azure Bastion service would be of help. So I go to the virtual network to which this virtual machine belongs, which is VNet 1 in this case. So I just go to that. I can see that this is VNet 1, also in East US. If I go to the subnets part, I have subnet 1, and also I have a dedicated subnet called Azure Bastion subnet, right? So Azure Bastion subnet, and let me see if I have an Azure Bastion host. I just go to the search Azure Bastion. I can see that I have a Azure Bastion host created, which is also in East US, and that is associated to virtual network 1, okay, and also Azure Bastion subnet. So we have the configuration, we have the setting ready. Now, having seen that, let's go to the virtual machine and let's see how that works, how exactly we can connect using Azure Bastion. So we don't have, on occasions when we don't have a public IP address and we still want to connect to the Azure VM, we just host Azure Bastion host on the virtual network, and we can come to the connection blade, click on Bastion, use Bastion. So it just works over the Azure portal, which is the web, and you can see that it is asking me for the username and password. So I just enter the same username and password which I created at the time of creating the virtual machine. So I enter the username and password for the virtual machine. You can see that connection is getting established over HTTPS. What's happening is, as we have seen the diagram, the connection is over the HTTPS to Azure Bastion, and Azure Bastion is forwarding the request, right, to the respective virtual machine. See, right? So over the private from the Azure Bastion or private IP, it is being RDP'd into the Azure VM. See, it's getting RDP'd, as we have seen in the diagram, from my machine over the web. I connected to the Azure Bastion host or public IP, and the Azure Bastion host took that request and forwarded over the private IP RDP port 3389 to the actual virtual machine. So I will be in now. So it's a web connection, SSL connection or TLS, which is over the private IP. In fact, I have not exposed the public IP of the virtual machine, and it's all happening over the private IP through the Azure Bastion server. Yeah, so I am in, right? You can see that I have successfully logged into the Azure virtual machine by means of Azure Bastion subnet, which is allowed me to mask the public IP and help me to connect using the private IP. Hope that was clear of a small video on the Azure Bastion service. Thank you.